into another Mercy Health matchup as we preview games in the Skyline Chili Crosstown Showdown. As always, it's presented by
Mercy Health Orthopedics and Sports Medicine and Meyer. You almost caught me off guard there.
I almost did. I'm Richard Skinner. He's Tom Gamble. This week's matchup features Beechwood at Dixie Heights. I got an affiliation to both. I coach basketball at Beechwood, and I'm an alum of Dixie Heights.
Right, and I can't believe you're not going to be there.
I know. I got another game I have to broadcast.
The folks at Dixie are just crushed.
I'm sure they are.
You won't be on property, those who actually are willing to admit that you once attended and graduated from there. But no, this is our stop in Northern Kentucky. Not the only stop. We have 3 Northern Kentucky games in the Showdown, but we are bringing tailgate at the Showdown to Rice Mountjoy Stadium starting at 5 o'clock on Friday. Working on some surprise guests as well with a Northern Kentucky flavor to join me.
I like that.
Yeah.
All right, both these teams record-wise struggling. Beechwood, that's a rarity for them. They've won the state championship in Class A the last 3 years. They've moved up to Double A this year, but they've yet to play one of their Double A district opponents. They have played a very tough schedule at this point. Corbin's a very good team.
They are.
Covcath we know about. Taft in Cincinnati, they lost to last week 7-3. It's been a tough schedule. They've been dealing with injuries. This, I think, is still a quality team that 2A teams are not going to want to face, but Dixie Heights is not a 2A team either.
No, they're not. But let's for Beechwood, don't forget, 4 straight appearances in the state final, Class A, won the last 3. You got to admit, their team last year was stacked.
It really
lost a ton. They've got a bunch of young players, some injuries. But don't forget this. They have lost to 2. Count them 2 Northern Kentucky teams in the last 4 years.
Right.
Covenant Catholic, every one of those years, and SK, Simon Kenton.
And it was a good game, and they actually beat them in the following.
Correct. And look at their win streaks once they get into district play and once they get going at the end of the year. So this could be, really, you could look at this game for both of these teams as kind of a catalyst game because they both want to go on runs the rest of the season heading into the postseason.
A couple key players for Beechwood.
Yes.
Obviously, the quarterback, Cam Herget, was the starter last year. But really, he was the only returning starter on offense. As you mentioned, they had a lot of guys to do. They're trying to figure some things out. They're playing a lot of young guys.
They are.
And I think that's factored into so far that slow start, which, again, I think they'll get this thing rolling as the season concludes.
Well, and Dixie's been bizarre. Their 2 wins, their 2-3, are against teams not from Northern Kentucky. They've played 3 Northern Kentucky teams, Cooper, Covenant Catholic, and Connor, and haven't scored a point in any of those 3 games. Dixie now, Jeremy Adams is really their go-to guy on every aspect. Doesn't come off the field. He was the primary QB last year. They're playing sophomore Logan Landers a little bit this year. Adams is more of the Wildcat QB. Nicholas Smedley anchors their defensive front, and I think that's going to be a challenge for Beechwood. Is Dixie's pretty darn good up front. Pierce Rollman, a sophomore like Landers. He's a free safety, leads the team in tackles, expecting big things from him throughout his career at Dixie Heights. So I think a lot of unanswered questions for both teams. Maybe this game on Friday night, kickoff 7 o'clock, will answer some of those.
Yeah, and for Beechwood on the defensive side, we saw in that game last week, I broadcast the game on Star 64. Blake Shepard, the linebacker, had a huge game. Ended up with 17 tackles. Mitchell Quartz with a big game. So it's an interesting one for both, just because, again, it's an out-of-district game, small school versus bigger school. And you're right, both trying to get a springboard for their district games and the games that are very meaningful for them coming up. All right, speaking of coming up, what do we got coming up next?
Well, coming up next, we've got the Mercy Health Huddle, the source of health information for your student-athlete. Welcome to another edition of the Mercy Health Huddle, the source of health information for your student-athlete. I'm Tom Gamble, and I've been joined by Dr. Samer Hassan from Mercy Health Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, a shoulder and elbow specialist, 2 things I am not, Doc. So we're going to cover, you might see him on the sidelines at Deer Park High School, one of the 40-plus partner schools for Mercy Health. So we're going to talk. You're an expert in shoulder and elbows, Doc, so let's talk about that, and I'm going to ask you a question I know nothing about, but I can ask it. What exactly is a slap tear?
Well, first of all, good morning, Tom.
Good morning to you.
Great to be here. So a slap tear stands for superior labrum anterior to posterior. So that's a mouthful, which is why we get by with saying slap tear. And what that refers to is the top part of the labrum, and the labrum is an O-ring that sort of lines the socket of the shoulder joint. And so I've got here my handy little model, my little prop. So the shoulder joint is basically the joint between the top of the arm bone or the humerus and the socket or the shoulder blade. And right at the top of the glenoid, this little dish at the end, is the labrum. And that top part of the labrum is that slap or superior labrum anterior to posterior. And this is a structure that can get injured.
And I know, Doc, in sports, obviously, you hear about injuries like this a lot of times. So someone out there, maybe a parent or a student-athlete may be saying, or even if the parent is someone who is still competing, what typically causes a slap tear?
Well, a slap tear is very common amongst overhead athletes, so baseball throwers, especially pitchers, you see it in tennis players, volleyball players. And what can happen is either from a sudden injury, the labrum can sort of tear. The top part of the labrum happens to be where the biceps tendon attaches, and so you can get a sudden traction or pull, and it can rip that labrum. In overhead throwers and pitchers, what often happens is it's more attritional. It happens over time from repetition. Thousands of throwing motion cycles can generally, or over time, peel away that labrum until it becomes torn and causes pain and what we call mechanical symptoms, clicking and catching that can be very bothersome and can affect their throwing motion and their throwing velocity.
So a final question in this segment is typically who gets these types of injuries? I would presume, is it more strain and more stress? Are you more susceptible to it if you're a pitcher in baseball, if you're a quarterback in football? Where you're throwing a lot, essentially.
Absolutely. We see it again in racket sports as well. We see it in volleyball. And then we also see it over time as we get older. So as we move from the competitive high school or collegiate or professional athlete to sort of the weekend warrior, is sometimes you get degenerative changes. After just a lifetime of wear and tear,
sure.
Like other structures around the shoulder, it can also start to fail and cause some of these same type of problems.
All right, so there you go. There's part one with Dr. Samar Hassan of Mercy Health Orthopedics and Sports Medicine. Coming up next, we're going to take a look through the Mercy Health huddle of, okay, so if this happens to you, we're going to look at treatment. We're going to look at, is surgery necessary, and how can we get you back to sport? We'll do that when we continue. It's another edition of the Mercy Health Huddle, the source of health information for your student athlete.
When it hurts to move, what often hurts most is the fact that you can't. Because every rebound is calling your name, and every dance should be danced. It's in moments like these that we step in to help you step back off the sidelines. Because it takes two to tango in this life, and you are meant to be the one. Mercy Health, healthcare for the universe of you.
Find an orthopedic doctor at mercy.com/ortho.